Today we're going to talk about expanding your research question. So when you start doing your research, you have your research question. And when you want to expand it, you really need to work backwards. Think about where you want to end up and figure out a way to get there. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a research question that isn't being used during this project, but that we can expand. So why did the rest of the world not help the Jews during the Holocaust? So we have to start somewhere. So what other countries could have helped them? And before we do that, we need to know what was going on in other countries. So let's stick to the Allies here. We won't include the Soviet Union because they actually made an agreement with Hitler near the beginning of the war in Europe. So then we have France, England, and the United States. So we're going to stick with the United States because for this lesson, that's probably what we're most interested in anyway. So what was going on in the United States at that point? The Great Depression. What could we ask about that? Did people care about what was happening in Europe at the time? Or were they more concerned about their own well-being? We'll come back to that. What else? So we're focusing on the United States. What did the United States know about what was happening in Germany? Where could they have found that out? What ties did the United States have with Germany at the time? Was the American president communicating with Hitler? What did the US know about the camps? Why didn't we take or offer to take Jewish refugees? You'll notice none of these are yes or no questions. You need to dig deep to get the answer. So you have your research question, you have those smaller questions, but you can't just type one of them into Google and expect to say on the first page, this is what you need for your video. You're going to have to start with those Holocaust resources on the website. You're going to need to read through several pages and take lots of notes and then decide what you're going to keep and what you're not going to keep. Let's go back to the individuals who are probably still worried about the Depression in the United States. What did American citizens know about what was happening in Europe? How were US citizens communicating with friends and relatives there? What were they finding out? How might it have been different for the American Jewish community? What was their status at the time? Getting the news in the 1930s and 1940s was way different from what we're getting today. Today, you can learn about anything just on your phone. But most of the communication about the war then came from newspapers. So which newspapers knew what was going on? How did they find out that information? What did they actually publish about it? Other news came from newsreels shown at theaters, and those were produced by the US government. What reasons could the government have for not spreading that information that they might know about the camps? So now we're going to look at expanding your research question. So of course we have 5 different research questions for this, depending on what your book is that you've read. And so the first one, so I have lived 1,000 years. Yours is going to focus on how did the separation of families affect Jews' ability to survive the Holocaust? And some subtopics in there might be families, obviously, as well as faith and anything else that you might come across. If you are reading Night, if you've read Night, then your question is, what did the Jews endure from everyday life to facing death, and how did they attempt to survive? And that would be, you could look up camps, families, faith there too. If you read The Book Thief, your question is, what was everyday life like for Germans during the Holocaust? And you can look at resistance, families, Nazi ideology to see what Jews had to deal with, similar to what your character did. The Boy Who Dared, why did the Nazis target the Jews? What about other groups such as the mentally and physically disabled, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, the Roma? You look again at Nazi ideology, the pyramid of hate in history. The Girl in the Blue Coat, how did the Holocaust affect those non-Jews living in Europe? How did they risk their lives to stop Hitler? You can look at the resistance and everyday life as well as the Nazi ideology again. Before you can start anything else, you're going to need to expand your research question. You need to make sure that you have at least 5 questions below that initial question. Each of those will in turn probably have several others. but make sure that you have 5 solid questions under that. The sample that I showed you at the beginning of this from a project from a few years ago is in the video vault on the website. You might want to take a look at that again to see how they frame their questions. You need to do all this expanding of your question before you even start to do research. Make sure that you divide up the responsibilities as to who's going to research what, who's going to do which question, and so on, so that you're not duplicating your efforts. There are a lot of websites you can see here that are also posted on the website under Holocaust resources. And though that's really where you're supposed to start with your research. Don't just put something into Google because it's not going to give you what you need and you don't know that it's credible. So know that whatever you see from those websites is going to be credible. The eyewitness site is what you're going to use to put in testimonies into your final video. You can look at those a little bit later. You can kind of mull around the website a little bit and you can get some information from watching videos, but you'll also be putting some little clips in there from there as well. Just as it says here, none of us is as smart as all of us together. You need to make sure that you work together with your book group on this. Stay in contact with each other, brainstorm, divvy up the responsibilities, do your part. Don't cut into somebody else's stuff unless you haven't been able to contact that person. Make sure if you can't meet a deadline that you tell your partners. But I think you're really going to get a lot out of this project, and I think you'll be proud of it at the end.